Well, greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to 2024 and our first episode of the John Campea Show podcast here in this brand new year. I am, of course, your host, John Campea. It is an awesome honor and privilege, as it is every day, to have you, our international friends, gather around as we talk about our favorite things in the world, movies and movie news, TV and streaming, and all that sorts of good stuff. And, I was thinking about not doing a show today. It is New Year's Day. We were out pretty late, as I'm sure a lot of you guys were too last night, celebrating the launching of the new year. But you know what? And Jonathan Voico's out today, so I'm in here doing the show from my office, of course. But you know what? I thought we would get the year started off right and get things going. And of course, if you're going to start the year off right, you got to be joined by writer, director, producer, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett. Robert, how you doing today, sir?
John, I'm actually going into 2024 with eyes open, full heart, and I'm pretty optimistic.
Did you guys get up to anything last night?
You know what? You're gonna laugh. So Elizabeth's parents came over, and we watched Ben-Hur.
The original Ben-Hur.
Not the silent. The Charlton Heston Ben-Hur. I had the 50th anniversary Blu-ray box set, which I hadn't opened in a while, and it's so fun. I said, you guys know that movie's 4 hours long. And they're like, well, we could put it on and watch it and it'll end right before New Year's. And I'm like, not exactly my biggest party, New Year's Eve party. But it was surprisingly satisfying, actually. We had a lovely time. They made a lovely dinner, and then we watched Ben-Hur. So normally I'm a party guy. I'm out there drinking it up. Not last night, and I actually kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah, Ann and we started New Year's Eve waking up in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Went down to the hospital, visit my mom. My mom, for those of you who don't know, has been in the hospital for nearly 2 years now. But things are going good. They think she's going to be fully ready to go back home at the end of January, so very excited about that. So we went and visited my mom at the hospital, went out to the farm, visited my dad a bit up at the ranch, and then we got to the airport. Was on a flight, landed at about 8 p.m. Los Angeles time. Ann and I hightailed it home, met a couple of friends, came over to the house. We got dressed up, went out to a club last night, and rung in the new year that way. And I'm operating on about 3 hours sleep. So wow. Today's going to be kind of a more laid back, relaxed kind of show.
Sure.
And we're going to take it casually. Anyway, guys, we do have a few things we're going to get started off here today talking about. By the way, this is how today's show is going to go. We're going to start off by talking about a few topics here. Then we're going to go over and start taking your live questions. If you guys have a thought, theory, question, opinion, whatever about any of the stuff that we're talking about or something else even, go ahead and use the super chat feature in the live chat, and we will get to that at or near the end of the show. Dominic Ray is saying John is drunk. That would be very difficult because John doesn't drink. But I don't know if there's any alcohol content in halls. If there is, maybe that'll make me a bit tipsy. All right, that down, guys. Let's get things started here and talk about this. 2023 is now in the rear view mirror, and I can say, Rob, for the first time in a number of years. Like, I remember when 2020 was over, we were like, thank God that year's over. And then when 2021 was over, we were like, thank God that year's over. And 2022, this was the first time in a few years that I think I went, you know what? It was a pretty good year. I mean, all things considered, a lot of bad things happened, yes, but compared to the previous number of years, not bad. Not bad. So I thought we would take a minute here, Rob, as we look back on 2023 and talk about what we thought were the biggest stories in the world of movies and movie news that year. And I'm going to count them down from 5 to 1. Then I'm going to ask you, Rob, what you thought were maybe some of the biggest ones of the year.
Okay.
And let me start off with a couple of honorable mentions. Okay. So these didn't make my top 5, but these I would consider a couple of honorable mentions. Number 1, in no particular order, Everything Everywhere All at Once, dominating the Oscars. I mean, it won Best Picture, Best Directors, Best Lead Actress, Best Supporting Actress, Best Supporting Actor. I mean, it just absolutely dominated. And, it was such a pleasant surprise because I remember when I saw it, I thought this is going to be one of these after I saw it, I thought this is going to be one of these awesome films that is just going to fly under everybody's radar. And it didn't. People caught on to it. And then it rolled into the Oscars. It had a ton of nominations. I didn't know how many it would win, but it was great to see that. So that's one of my honorable mentions. Another honorable mention for me on the sadder side was the passing of Matthew Perry. And, you know, it's funny when we talk about the passing of celebrities, people we don't know. Sometimes maybe we've met them. Often we never have. I don't think I've ever met Matthew Perry. And then when they pass, you realize how many hours of your life you spent with that person, even though they were just on your screen. And I think, you know, when he passed away, I think a lot of people look back at the series Friends, of course, one of the most celebrated shows of all time, and you know how beloved he was as a character on that. And of course, him passing away was a pretty big deal. Last honorable mention I'm going to do, and you know what? Maybe there's an argument to be made this should have been in my top 5, but it was just such a long, stretched out, this is just a part of our year thing. I decided to make it part of the honorable mentions, and that is, of course, the dual strikes that went on in Hollywood, completely crippling Hollywood, shutting everything down, a big pain in the ass for the studios, for the actors, for the writers, the whole bit. I mean, thankfully, here we are now in 2024, and those strikes have been resolved, at least for now. And those are there. So those are a couple of the ones that didn't quite make my top 5 as the biggest stories of the year, but I thought they at least deserved honorable mentions. Okay. So here's what I would break down as the top 5 biggest movie news stories from my point of view, at least at any rate. At number 5 for me is Mario Brothers shocking the world by being, for much of the year, the number 1 box office film of the year. That is until Barbie came along. Making like $1.3 something billion at the box office. And Rob, if you remember, like a few months before the movie came out, I said, you know what? I know everybody's thinking this was a dumb idea. I thought making a Mario Brothers movie was a dumb idea. But I said, you know what? No. This is going to be the biggest film of the year.
You were saying that.
I think this is going to be the biggest. Now, of course, it came in second. It didn't come in first. And I remember but I remember a lot of people saying, like, you're crazy. This thing's going to make 400 million tops. And I had every day people writing said, I don't know, John, I think you're a little bit nuts. But I think that Mario Brothers movie came out and like just shocked the world. It's not the best movie of the year. It's an entertaining little film, but I mean, it just went out to go see it. Everybody underestimated the nostalgia value of it. And it was a delightful little film. So that was my number 5 movie news story of the year. My number 4 movie news story of the year is the Jonathan Majors drama, because it's not just another TMZ story. Like Jonathan Majors, I think heading into 2023, pardon me, was poised to be the next big thing. Everybody celebrated his, appearance in Creed. Everybody celebrated his appearance in Loki. He was absolutely stunning in, the HBO series. Why did I suddenly freeze on his HBO series? The one he got all the acclaim for. Guys in the live chat, help me out. What was the name of that series again? It was it was amazing. And then it got canceled after one season. And Lovecraft Country.
Yes.
Lovecraft Country. I think the first person to put that in was Kane Legion, and as well as John A.M. Thank you, guys. He was brilliant in Lovecraft Country. And then early in the year, I think, Rob, it was around March, April, somewhere around there, the report came out that he had been arrested and all this kind of stuff happened. And, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Jonathan Majors going forward, because I did an editorial video on this, kind of breaking down what he was and what he wasn't guilty of. And, ultimately the jury found that Jonathan Majors did not intend to cause harm or physical pain to somebody, but that through his own reckless and careless actions, he did cause harm, but he didn't intend to. So it's going to be one of these things that I think is going to be really interesting to see moving forward, how Jonathan Majors' career, it's going to take a big hit in the short term, but I wonder, with the fact of what he was found guilty of, which was recklessness, as opposed to what he was found not guilty of, which was intent, to see how that will play out further down the line. But I mean, clearly with him supposed to be been Kang for the MCU, the big baddie moving forward, I think that takes the spot as number 4 on my list. All right, let's go on to number 3. My number 3 biggest story of the year was the absolute flopping of a number of high-profile comic book movies. Now, we had come to expect that, oh yeah, the odd DC film will struggle at the box office. But the fact that all of them, and they weren't alone in the floppage coming out, because you're talking about Shazam 2 only made $133 million. The Flash made $270 million. The Marvels, so on the Marvel side, the Marvels only made $205 million. Blue Beetle only made 129. Now remember, these are numbers that we are accustomed to hearing as the opening weekend numbers for big comic book films, right? So Blue Beetle made 129. And as of right now this is only current, but after a couple of weeks out, Aquaman 2, the first one was $1 billion film sitting at $258 million. Now, I didn't include in that list, Rob, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, because even though it was a significant disappointment at the box office, I think at $470 million, that's more than double what all these other films are. So I decided to leave Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, even though I thought it was a terrible film. I left that one off the list. But I got to say, the flopping of a lot of comic book films this year was a big part of it.
Yeah.
All right. My number 2 biggest movie news story of the year is Barbenheimer. I mean, this is just something that organically became this meme nuclear apocalypse where, a lot of people, the traditional wisdom is looking at something like you're opening these 2 major films on the same day. That's going to hurt them. But obviously Warner Brothers and what was it, Universal that was behind Barbie? Universal was behind Oppenheimer. So Warner Brothers and Universal, they both looked and said, no, we think these are 2 very different films, but we think they both can have success. Barbie went on to become the number 1 film of the year at $1.4 billion, just edging out Super Mario Brothers. And pardon me, Oppenheimer went on to make over $950 million at the box office. And it was just something that got memed, talk about, and just one of the biggest combined, the things made $2.4 something billion at the box office. It was incredible. So my number 2 movie news story of the year is Barbenheimer, which leads me to what I personally think is the number 1 story of the year. And that was James Gunn and Peter Safran taking over DC. Because, pardon me, I think there's a couple of different elements to this. The first element is new leaders of DC. But stepping back and looking at an even larger thing, that kind of indicated the fact that DC was throwing in the towel on the DCEU. Something that some people might suggest they should have done years ago, but that they have thrown in the towel on the existing DCEU, and they were looking forward to kind of restarting with new leadership, with, for the first time ever, DC was given its own status as its own independent studio to function under Warner Brothers. And I just still think to this day that James Gunn, you're going to be hard pressed, Rob, I think, to find any filmmaker out there who is as hardcore as a comic book fanatic as James Gunn is. And when you look that he made wonderful films for both Marvel and for DC. Peacemaker, I think, is my favorite DC show ever. You got Peter Safran coming in there to bring the business acumen in there as well. So yeah, those are my top 5. I think it's the Super Mario Brothers shocking the world. I think it's the Jonathan Majors story. I think it's the flopping of a lot of comic book films. I think it's Barbenheimer. And I think it's James Gunn and Peter Safran, because it kind of represented, Rob, new leaders, a new launch to DC, and for the first time ever, DC being granted its status as its own studio. So a lot of big things, a lot of things I'm sure I left off. Rob, over to you. What did you see as some of the biggest news stories? Did you include some of the ones that I had, or is there a couple that I'm missing out on here? What did you think?
Well, I think one of the things that struck me is the devaluation of some of these companies in terms of their, like Disney, for instance, their stock price, their high back in February was $113 a share. And Friday, when the markets closed, you were down to 90 a share. Now, that's not a hugely significant drop, but it's the stock, it's a good percentage there. I mean, it's more than 10% of its value for the year. And I would have thought a company like Disney was, 2 years ago, even during the pandemic, was sort of, beyond reproach. And I think a lot of the entertainment companies now, we've seen a real readjustment, and we're going to continue to see. Everyone went all in on streaming, and we had obviously the combination of Disney taking over Fox, which we saw Warner Brothers and Disney both celebrate their 100th anniversaries in 2023 without a lot of fanfare. I mean, Disney's Wish movie that came out, which was supposed to celebrate the entire animation legacy, didn't do well. And I really think that the core values of these companies have sort of been lost. And that was something I didn't really see coming. And, with the entertainment landscape constantly changing, and streaming did not turn out to be as bulletproof as people thought. I think that there's going to be a lot of soul searching that's going on moving forward. Certainly, we've seen that with Bob Iger. Bob Iger's return to Disney has been anything but wildly successful, and he's weathering a storm that is continuing on. So it's going to be, I think that was while it might not have been headline grabbing, it's been an ongoing problem for both Warner Brothers and for Disney, and we'll see where
Paramount as well, and also on death's door.
100%. And I wouldn't have seen that coming in 2023. But on the other hand, we also 2023 did have a pretty vibrant box office, considering.
Sneakily so, so, because when I know what you're referring to. When I saw the news come out that in the final week there, the box office in 2023 crossed $9 billion, I was like, really? Like, that kind of caught me by surprise.
Well, I think another thing that it's not necessarily headline grabbing, but I thought that 2023 wound up being a pretty terrific year for movies. For me, I loved movies like Past Lives. I enjoyed things like Saltburn. I loved Oppenheimer. I even liked Barbie. Like you said, Super Mario Brothers surprised. And there was a lot of great indie films. We had films from Michael Mann in Ferrari, which I actually really liked. Even though I didn't love, after we saw clips of it at CinemaCon, I was really excited for Napoleon. I'm waiting to see that 4-hour version. But we got Ridley Scott, Martin Scorsese, Michael Mann, all doing movies again, which, these guys are in their 80s. And it's incredible that they're still making movies. And while I thought they were varying degrees of quality, it's still great to see these guys out there making adult-oriented films, taking big swings, and they're still making stuff. Seeing low-budget horror like Talk to Me, direct two brothers coming out of making movies or making videos for TikTok and Instagram and social media, parlaying that into horror success with their first feature. I thought that that was pretty nice to see in 2023. A lot of great diverse movies, all kinds of subject matter. While the comic book movies floundered, we saw a lot of really great movies for the year. And I think that that's something we should all take stock in, because that's what we want. We want great entertainment, and there's been great shows. Reacher season 2 has been great. I've loved For All Mankind. There's a lot of great stuff that we're getting, and I think we forget that we have these embarrassment of riches. We're so quick to just poo-poo everything, but we're getting some really good stuff, and I'm really looking forward to. There's a lot of good movies coming out in 2024,
right?
And I'm looking forward to them too.
We will talk about later in the week about the things we're really looking for. By the way, somebody in the live chat mentioned this, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that yes, of course, the comic book genre also had a couple of big successes. Obviously, with Guardians of the Galaxy 3, the Amazing Spider
Across the Spider-Verse,
stuff like that. So for sure, but clearly a a disproportionate number of big flops. So there's that. So guys, those are our big stories. What we thought were the big stories of 2023. What do you guys think? Did we leave any off the list that you thought should have been mentioned? Go ahead and leave your thoughts as to what you thought about that. All right, guys. With that down, let's move on to this. You know, as we enter into 2024 now, a very significant event has happened that a lot of people have been buzzing and talking about, and that is the passing of Mickey Mouse from privately ironclad copyright into the public domain. You guys may have heard some people talking about this online, whatever, that Mickey Mouse, as of January 1st, that's today, was now entering the public domain. Now, I've seen a lot of people talking about this online and some misinformation going around. So let's talk about the story first. So here's the actual story. This comes to us from the Daily Beast, who sum it up like this. With a new year comes renewed potential for bastardized versions of beloved Disney characters. The House of Mouse's earliest version of Mickey and Minnie Mouse from the 1928 Steamboat Willie cartoon has officially entered the public domain in the US as of January 1st. This means that artists are free to rework those first variants as they see fit without any cost or permissions needed. So basically, the very first appearance of Mickey Mouse in that old 1928 Steamboat Willie is now officially in the public domain. That means you can use it for anything you want. You don't have to pay a royalty. You don't have to get anybody's permission. If you want to make something with that Mickey Mouse from Steamboat Willie, you are more than free to do so. Now, that's all true about it being in the public domain. It's open for everybody to use. Rob, a lot of filmmakers have made films based on public domain works. The works of Shakespeare are public domain. You know, things like that. But there is an important thing to understand. And I've been seeing some people kind of getting this wrong. Some people think that because Steamboat Willie, with the first appearance of Mickey Mouse, is now in the public domain, that means that you can do anything you want with Mickey Mouse. And that is very important to know is not true. So here's how this is kind of working. There's a big difference between the Steamboat Willie version of Mickey Mouse, which, wait a second, you can see over here, and this, what we now know as the true image of Mickey Mouse. So even though Steamboat Willie and this specific iteration of Mickey Mouse is now public domain, it is only this specific iteration of Mickey that is public domain. Anything that got added to Mickey later is not public domain. So for example, in this image, you see Mickey's not wearing gloves. The traditional now white glove wearing Mickey Mouse, you're not allowed to use that because that is not public domain. This Mickey was just two black dots for eyes. The traditional Mickey we now know as the iconic figure of Disney has the whites and the blacks in his eyes. That is not public domain. Mickey's iconic and his voice, that's stuff that came after Steamboat Willie. It's not something you can use. I mean, basically speaking, there's a lot of things about Mickey Mouse as we know him that was not a part of Steamboat Willie that is not public domain. So if you want to make your own animated film starring this character specifically as he's drawn here, you're free to do that. But don't cross any of those other lines. Don't refer to him. And you cannot make it look like your thing is a Disney thing. That's also very important to understand because there are still trademarks. You can't make it look like it's your own thing. There's a couple of really interesting ways this came into play about there are certain things you can use and certain things you can't. Remember, Rob, back in 2013, Disney put out that Wizard of Oz prequel movie called Oz the Great and Powerful. And a lot of people went, wait a minute, Wizard of Oz isn't a Disney film. How are they allowed to do a Wizard of Oz movie? Well, here's why they were able to do it. Because the original book Wizard of Oz, or The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which is what I think the original book was called, was now in the public domain. So the movie Wizard of Oz was not at that time in the public domain, but the original book was. That meant that Disney could make their own movie based on the original book. But here's the catch. A lot of things, Rob, in the original movie were not in the book. For example, the biggest highlight, of course, is the ruby red slippers, right? In the book, the slippers, I believe, are silver. But the movie decided to make them ruby slippers. Well, that meant Disney in their movie, the Oz the Great and Powerful, they could not use ruby slippers. Also, Munchkins. In the movie, they made Munchkin Land this bright, vibrant kind of thing. Well, that's not the way it was described in the book. So that's only something for the movie. So when they made Oz the Great and Powerful, they could only make Munchkins with more earth tones and stuff like that, make it more plain like the book. So, or take, for example, this is one that Taylor would like. Take, for example, Pooh, Blood and Honey. A lot of people are like, wait a minute, how can you make a Winnie the Pooh horror movie? Well, because the original book of Winnie the Pooh entered the public domain. And so they were allowed to use the characters and things that are described in that book, and they could use it as they want. Now, a lot of people, Rob, when Pooh, Blood and Honey came out, they were like, well, how come it's just Pooh and Piglet? Like, why isn't Tigger there? Tigger would have been awesome. Well, the reason Tigger wasn't there was because Tigger wasn't in the original book, which was in the public domain. Tigger came later. And at the time, Tigger was not a part of the public domain. So even though, yes, there are, Mickey Mouse is in the public domain, and that means that people can do certain things with that Mickey Mouse from Steamboat Willie. There's still a lot of limitations that are there that you have to be very, very careful of. Anyway, Rob, you read about this story. Mickey Mouse, still, it's huge news, right? Like, this iconic symbol of Disney is now in the public domain. What can you see happening with this moving forward? And by the way, we've got a couple of other major characters in upcoming years. Superman, the original appearance of Superman is going to pass into the public domain in a few years. Batman is going to pass the public. Like, how do you see this working out?
I think it's going to be interesting to see what people do with, I mean, I could see somebody like South Park jumping on this, you know, and making some really profane, like Steamboat Willie story. I mean, something that the tragic life of this mouse, something it'll be hilarious, but probably very unflattering. Or you know, I think these characters are going to be used in fascinating ways. Like you mentioned, Superman didn't fly. You know, he leapt tall buildings in a single bound. That's what he jumped. And it's going to be interesting to see characters, like you could do a whole comic book series with Steamboat Willie looking the way it looks. And what I find interesting, John, and I don't know the answer to this, if you were to make if you were to write a novel about the Steamboat Willie Mickey Mouse, would that novel then be copyrightable? Because it would be an original work. So
yes, so the character that you use is not copyrightable. Anything in your new book that is directly from the original Steamboat Willie is not copyrightable. But if you say that this Steamboat Willie has the power of laser eyes,
right, then
that becomes copyrightable to you. Mickey having laser eyes becomes copyrightable to you, but nothing from the original book.
And I'll be curious to see what that means moving forward. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how corporations deal with that. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of this happen because a lot of our vulnerable or venerable pop culture icons will eventually, in our lifetime, slip into the public domain. And it's happened in the past. Like, for instance, the original Night of the Living Dead, Romero's Night of the Living Dead, was a public domain film. That's why anybody could put it out if they wanted to. It was various reasons, but that's why Romero produced a remake of it. You know, and it's very interesting to watch what happens with these properties. So I'm going to be curious to see what people do with Steamboat Willie Mickey Mouse.
By the way, somebody's asking in the live chat, will Foundation and Lord of the Rings also become public domain? And the answer to that question is, Yes. I think I just read a thing that I think we're under 20 years away from the original Lord of the Rings novels passing into public domain. And then it's going to be really interesting to see what happens after that. Anyway, guys, what do you think about that? I mean, it's not the Mickey that we kind of recognize and know today, but still like the original Mickey Mouse story. Steve-O Willie is now in the public domain, and we got more stuff coming in the upcoming years. How do you feel about that? Jump on down and let us know what you guys think. All right, guys, listen, we still have a couple of big topics we want to talk about, including George R.R. Martin is saying that he is working on no less than 3 Game of Thrones animated series right now, and Wonka has completely drowned Aquaman 2 at the box office, retaking the #1 spot for it. We're going to talk about that and a bunch more, but before we do that, we're going to take a second and thank the sponsor of today's episode of the John Campea Show podcast and our main sponsor for 2024, my mobile service provider, and they should be yours, Mint Mobile. Guys, we want to take a second and thank a sponsor of this video, Mint Mobile. On average, it takes about 30 days for a person to break their New Year's resolution. So if saving money was on your 2024 list, your odds aren't looking that great. Luckily, I have a 100% guaranteed way to save you money this year. Just switch to Mint Mobile. For a limited time, wireless plans from Mint Mobile are $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. That's unlimited talk, text, and data for $15 a month. I've told you guys many times that after switching to Mint Mobile, I am spending less than a third on my cell bill than I used to with a major carrier. Say goodbye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. All Mint plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. And don't worry about having to change phones or numbers. Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. So guys, to get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/Campea. That's mintmobile.com/Campea. Cut your wireless bills to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/Campea. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. And thank you to our friends at Mint Mobile for sponsoring today's episode of the John Campea Show podcast. All right, guys, with that down, let's move on to this, shall we? Not known for his efficiency, George R.R. Martin, of course, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a lot of people are still waiting on his books. They're still waiting on the final Game of Thrones books, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they are.
But he's working on a ton of other stuff, including, according to George R.R. Martin, 3 Game of Thrones animated series. Now, this comes to us from the folks over at Variety, and I'm going to read this a little bit at length because I think it's really interesting. George R.R. Martin says he has 3 Game of Thrones animated series in the works, including the Sea Snake show, which I got to tell you, I'm all about that. But they were originally talking about this being live action. Anyway, let me read what they got here. Inspired by a recent screening of Netflix's animated series Blue Eye Samurai, which, by the way, if you have not watched Blue Eye Samurai on Netflix, do it. It's really good. Mm-hmm. Anyway, Game of Thrones creator George R.R. Martin penned a new blog post praising the work of the people who did it and says, Blue Eye Samurai is very much its own thing, and it is magnificent, Martin wrote. Even if you don't normally watch animation, give it a try. It's terrific. I think if you like my own stuff, I think you'll love it. Then go on and say this. The writer then pivoted to his current work. As it happens, HBO and I have our own animated projects set in the world of A Song of Fire and Ice. None of them had been greenlit yet, but I think we are getting close to taking the next step with a couple of them. The father of Westeros revealed that he previously had 4 animated series pitches in development with HBO. Variety broke the Game of Thrones animated series news back in 2021, and Martin went even further, revealing that there were several writer rooms, scripts, and outlines created. Unfortunately, I should say, 2 of the 4 projects were shelved, as Martin put it. While he continues to toil on the 2 remaining animated projects, Martin also dropped the news that his earlier announced the Sea Snake series would be pivoting to animation as well. He says, we've moved 9 Voyages, our series about the legendary voyages of Sea Snake, over from live action into animation. A move I support fully. Budgetary constraints would have likely made a live action version prohibitively expensive. What with half of the show taking place at sea and the necessity of creating a different port every week. From Driftmark to List to the on and on, all these different places they'd be going. So, Rob, what we've got here is we've got George R. R. Martin saying, number one, watch Blue Eye Samurai, because it is great. I wasn't going to watch it. A bunch of our viewers told me to watch it. I watched it, binged the whole thing in a day.
It's great.
It's so good. But he says, just so you know, we're working on 3. I love that they're doing Sea Snake. Not many details in the other 2. Rob, I never read the Fire and Ice books, but I got to imagine if you're a fan of the books, you're maybe getting a little bit frustrated with the fact that he's working on all these other new things. Meanwhile, we still don't have these books. But anyway, what do you think about this? The fact that they're saying, so much Game of Thrones content being made, developing 3 different animated things, 1 on the Sea Snake. How are you feeling about all this?
Well, look, I think we were all waiting. We had a wait and see attitude about House of the Dragon. And I think for the most part, I think I can speak for everybody that everybody was pretty blown away by how good it turned out to be. So, and with George R. R. Martin actively involved in the creation of this stuff, John, I'm excited. I think that we're going to be getting the level of animation that we've seen in stuff like Arcane and even the show I worked on, Dota and Blue-Eyed Samurai. There's some great stuff being done. And I think doing shows, animated shows or live action, I think what we're going to get from Westeros moving forward, I'm excited for all of it, especially if George R. R. Martin stays involved, because I think they know what they have. And again, if we're going to go by House of the Dragon as an indication of the quality, I don't think anyone can say, I think people are going to be excited as long as they keep that quality up.
What do you think? What do you think about this shift that seems to be happening? Not away from live action, because clearly the world of Westeros has more live action planned, but this kind of move to also embracing animation as a part of this world. I guess starting with Sea Snake. How do you think about that? How do you feel about that move?
Well, it depends again how it's done. And we're seeing, like I said, we've seen in animation some really great stuff. It harks back to, I really enjoyed the Animatrix. When they told stories, there was like a prequel story that was going to lead into the Matrix sequels. As long as I don't mind the medium, I don't mind animation. It all comes down to writing. It all comes down to the characters and the stories. And obviously, when you're working in animation, you want it to look good. But the animation that we're getting, if they made an Arcane-looking show that was set in Westeros, I'd be like, or even like Blue-Eyed Samurai, I'm like, yeah, man, I'd totally be on board. It all comes down to the execution. But I don't think that, people have grown up with animation now. So I don't think that when I was younger, I was not very interested in animated spin-offs of favorite live action things. But I think we live in a different world now. And I think people can really get behind a great animated series. And the series that we're getting seem to be better and better and better. And also, you have a whole generation of people that grew up watching anime. So I think that there's, people are adult-oriented animation is something that we're going to see more and more of.
One of our live viewers, DB, wrote in that to not forget that we got a Lord of the Rings, the Rohirrim.
The War of the Rohirrim, yeah.
Yeah, that I think is coming in 2024. So there's a lot of interesting stuff on the horizon. It's interesting to see these live action properties kind of embracing animation as another outlet.
Yeah, because it's not. It doesn't. These expensive fantasy shows are incredibly difficult to make, and they cost a lot of money. But in animation, you can show us whatever you want. And it doesn't cost a lot of money, and maybe we'll see areas of Westeros that they couldn't explore in live action, but we'll see them done in animation. And I'm excited.
All right, guys. Question is for you. What do you think about this? And are you one of these fans of the books that are maybe excited to hear this news, but kind of frustrated about, hey, where's the finishing books? Where's that at this point? We'd like to see that. All right, guys. With that down, let's move on to this, shall we? Now, of course, Wonka opened a few weeks ago. Wonderful film, by the way. Anne and I went to go see it again when we took our trip to Canada this past week. A truly wonderful little film. Not my number one film of the year or anything like that, but a really charming, delightful little movie that I enjoyed quite a bit. Well, the next week, Aquaman came out. And of course, Aquaman took the number one spot because it was its first week. But surprisingly, now in its third week and Aquaman's second, Wonka retook the number one spot. Wonka in its third week retook the number one spot away from Aquaman and by a pretty decent little margin. Number one at the box office this weekend was Wonka, making $23.9 million. Aquaman Last Kingdom made $19.5 in its second weekend. Migration made $17 million. The Color Purple made $13, and rounding out the top five was Anyone But You at $9 million. Now, this to me is very interesting because, number one, I didn't think Wonka would make all that much money anyway, in general. But so far, as we go over and take a look at this, Wonka is closing in on the $400 million mark, which at a $125 million budget, Forbes was forecasting that it needed to make between 250 and 300 million to break even. It is well into the profit. It's going to get into the hundreds of millions of dollars of profitability now, probably sometime this week. Then we see Aquaman, which is significantly behind Wonka at $258 million. Now, just for comparison's sake, though, the Marvels made 205. And by the way, Aquaman is still going. Whereas the Marvels has done its theatrical run. So all Aquaman is now doing is increasing its lead over the Marvels. Still, the last Aquaman movie made $1 billion. And I was very surprised. Rob, I'll be honest with you. I still really felt that Wonka might get some curious people out to see it. But once Aquaman comes out, and remember, I didn't think Aquaman would be another $1 billion film at all. But once Aquaman 2 came out, it would get that number one spot and probably hold that number one spot for a few weeks. But I don't know. Here it is. So, Rob, let me ask you this question. Is Wonka taking the number one spot back from Aquaman more of a commentary on Wonka and that it's quite good and people are going to see it? Or is it the disappointment and the failure of Aquaman 2? What do you think the bigger story is here?
I think it's a bit of both, but I mean, look, I think movies should first and foremost be judged on their own merits. Now, I haven't seen Wonka, but everybody I've talked to has liked it and enjoyed it. And you had the director of Paddington making it. So I think the fact that, and all the stuff I've seen from it, you know, we first saw clips at CinemaCon, it all looked good to me. And so I think Wonka's success, and it's also, I think it's probably, I put it in the same league as something like Mary Poppins Returns, even though it's a prequel. You know, you're making a prequel to a much beloved movie that's been around for 50 years. And I think people went to see it for its own sake. Another Warner Brothers movie. Aquaman, I think, failed to do what the first movie did for whatever reason. And, when I saw Aquaman, I was like, it just was all over the place. I thought it was kind of a mess. And from a storytelling standpoint, it wasn't satisfying. And whereas, I was with you when I saw Aquaman 1. I loved Aquaman 1. I went into Aquaman wanting to like it. I don't think it was a particularly bad movie, but it was just a mess. It wasn't satisfying. And I think that's why it's not winning more acclaim at the box office or from fans, because it just wasn't as good of a film. It just felt like there was too many people sticking their fingers in that pie, whereas Wonka has been a far more satisfying experience for people.
I got to tell you, man, I didn't hate Aquaman 2.
No.
The way I described Aquaman 2 was like, it's got a lot of really silly stuff in it.
Yeah.
But the way I described it, I said, when something silly happens in a movie, there are one of two reactions it can cause. Either covering your eyes and cringing, or going, and, maybe giggling a little. And I found, with the abundance of silly stuff, don't even get me going on the Martin Short Jabba the Hutt underwater fish character. Never mind about that. But I found there was a number of the silly moments in the film, and there were too many, but a number of the silly moments, instead of making me slap my forehead or cringe, I kind of went, okay, that's kind of cute. But so I didn't hate it. I didn't like it anywhere near as much as I like the first Aquaman, though.
No.
Like, it's just a film that kind of lost its way. And, you know, I remember when I came out of it, Rob, a lot of people asked me, how was it as a conclusion to the DCEU? And I said, it's not a fair question to ask because they never made this movie as a conclusion to the DCEU.
Right.
They never thought this was the conclusion to the DCEU. They made it just as another, you know, as another film. And did you see the post-credit scene with Patrick Wilson?
Yeah.
So I won't say what it was, but a lot of people thought, well, that post-credit scene should have been something that just tied up the DCEU. But again, that wasn't the movie James Wan was making. So I didn't think it was fair to do that. But again, man, for me, when I look at these numbers and I see that Wonka, which, remember, when they announced this movie was coming, they started running the trailers for it. A lot of people said nobody was going to go see this. I believed in the film, but I also didn't think it was going to do great. But to see that it kind of lost the number one spot to Aquaman because Aquaman was debuting, and it to retake it, I'm going to say that I think, Rob, this is more of a story about Wonka. That it's just the word has gotten out that people really enjoy the film, and it's really quite delightful. It's a very different from the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, but it also fits in with it really nicely. You know?
Well, and I don't like it when any movie fails. You know, movies are so difficult to make. So many people are now working on them. There's such a risk involved in making these large budget entertainments that I never like to see them fail. And I take no pleasure. I wanted Marvels to be good. I liked the original Captain Marvel more than most people did. It's just, I just don't think it was the story they should have told. I would like to have seen the character of Captain Marvel. Forget what you think of Brie Larson. Have an Empire Strikes Back second movie. You know, a real banger, something where there's real personal stakes involved and it told a galaxy spanning story. That's not what we got. But I just, you know, I don't like to see them fail like this. And it's frustrating to see a movie like Aquaman. Look, we like The Flash. And I will die on that hill. I like The Flash. I bought the disc. I had a blast with it. It's a little goofy. You know, it's all over the place, and having watched it a couple of times, but I liked it. You know, and I consider the DCEU is really Zack Snyder's, you know, beginning with Man of Steel, and maybe in a way you could say the Zack Snyder's Justice League is really the conclusion of the DCEU. But I think that, you know, DC has been better. The Christopher Nolan trilogy, The Batman, Joker. I mean, and I think that even though they're trying to build a cohesive DC universe, I think we're going to get a different feel to superhero movies. They have to do something that feels different.
100%.
And I think you're going to go back to and like the Batman feels different. When you watch the Batman, Matt Reeves' Batman, it feels like its own thing. And I think that's what they have to do, because they can't just repeat these. You have to feel differently about movies than we do, because the current crop of comic book films is just not working.
No,
it's not exciting.
And that was another big story, I think, of 2023 that we didn't touch on before, is just that not only did a lot of the comic book movies fail at the box office, comic book movies in 2023, and to a degree, a lot of them in 2022, weren't great. Like even a lot of the ones like, say, like a Black Adam, or something like a Shazam 2, or something like the Marvels. Yeah, even some of these films that I kind of liked, only one or two out of the past 8 or 9 did I think were great. And if you just go back a couple of years ago, you get 8 or 9 out of 10 that were great, and then 1 or 2 that weren't so good. And it's that's another. But anyway, I talk about that a lot. So guys, what do you think about this? Wonka has overtaken the number 1 spot from Aquaman. Is this more of a fact of Aquaman drowning, or is this more of a fact of Wonka, you know, taking you to a world of pure imagination? Whatever you guys think, Let us know down below. All right, guys. With all that down, we're going to go over and start taking your live questions here. So let's jump over and do that right now as I bring up your stuff. Here we go. And we're going to get started off here with Jose Miez, who writes, spring football is back, United Football League. Hey, listen, I watched, by the way, the conclusion of Welcome to Wrexham Season 2 was amazing. But, football to me is still, football. All right. Dwayne Fernandez writes, hey guys, do you think Vin Diesel will be replaced for Fast and the Furious after the news? No. First of all, right now it's an allegation, so nothing else has happened. And full disclosure, I'm a big Vin Diesel fan, so take whatever I say with a grain of salt. Right now, what it is an allegation. Nothing else has happened. But even if they decided to move on from Vin Diesel, Rob, you can't make Fast and Furious without Vin Diesel. They tried it once. And, well, they tried it twice, even though he popped up at the end of Fast 3. And you're just not going to get the results. So either way, they either make the next Fast and Furious with Vin Diesel, or they just don't make another Fast and Furious. I don't know, Rob, what do you think?
Well, you can't do it without Vin Diesel. And again, it really depends how this plays out. There are allegations. He hasn't been convicted of any criminal wrongdoing. But I mean, we've seen how quickly these things can derail a career, and it sounds like it's serious. So I think that he will weather the storm, however. But if this is true, then he has to pay the piper. But I don't think you could make a Fast and Furious movie without Vin Diesel in it. But you know what? After Fast 10, dude, I don't know.
I'm okay if they don't. But, and hey, listen, Hobbs and Shaw.
Right.
It did. And I think it made over $700 million or something like that.
Yeah.
So, but I just don't think you can do a proper Fast and Furious movie without Vin Diesel. All right. Al writes, 1 or 2. Happy New Year's. These are my 5 best films of 2023. 5, Dumb Money. 4, The Flash. Another person who appreciates The Flash. 3, Oppenheimer. 2, Radical. And number 1, Spider-Verse. My worst 5 movies are 5, Rebel Moon. 4, Haunted Mansion. 3, Peter Pan and Wendy. 2, 651. And number 1, Knights of the Zodiac. I have not yet. I meant to do my top 10 of 2023 already, but I haven't yet seen. I have one movie I got to still see, Rob. I still haven't seen Poor Things. And I was planning on seeing Poor Things when I was in Canada, but vacationing, spending time with my family, and doing some things my wife wanted to do take priority. I'm not working on it. And so we did go to the movies one night, but Anne wanted to go see Wonka again, and I wanted to see Wonka again too. So I cannot put together my top 10 until I see that. Hopefully in the next 48 hours, I'm going to see Poor Things, and I'll be able to get that list put together. But as of right now, Rob, I'll tell you, my favorite film of the year, having not seen Poor Things yet, is still Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Rebel Moon will probably be on my worst list, but it's not going to be number 1 by any chance. Do you got any things that stand out to you as your number 1?
Well, you got your Poor Things. I thought was extraordinary, but for me, my best, the number 1 for me was Oppenheimer, and I've watched it 3 times since I got the 4K disc, and I just can't stop watching that film. The performances, I mean, Robert Downey Jr., Cillian Murphy, I mean, I can't believe how good that movie actually is, how much I like that film. But there's also other movies this year like Past Lives. That is a quiet little movie that I absolutely adore. And I think I watched Saltburn. I didn't see Saltburn in the theater. I watched it streaming. I really enjoyed that. And I think that there's a lot of great stuff. Zone of Interest knocked me out. I mean, it's depressing as hell, but I really liked it a lot. And there's been a lot of, again, we were talking about it earlier, there's a lot of great movies out there. And I did a show where I was talking about my top 10, but it keeps moving. I keep changing my Oppenheimer stays at number 1, but I think, again, we had a great year for movies.
Yeah, we really did. All right. Next up, Chef Rigo writes in.
Rigo!
Says, went to TGIF on Christmas. I'm assuming that means TGIF, like Fridays. On Christmas, and my friend and I mentioned that we work at Shogun. And then their manager asked her if I was the Chef Rigo from the show. Shout out to Justin. I believe that was his name. Oh, that's awesome. You know, I get a big kick. You know, Rigo, we had somebody else write in earlier saying I can't remember which movie it was, but it was on the show. And somebody wrote and said, I was in the movie theater and I heard these guys behind me talking about something that you said on the show. And I turned around and said, did you guys watch the John Campea Show? And it's like, I always get a big kick, not only when I get to meet people who watch the show, but when I hear other viewers meeting other viewers watching the show too. So that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that story, Chef Rigo. Appreciate that, man. Connor Dorian writes, did you watch episode 3 of the Percy Jackson TV series? I have not seen episode 3. I was on vacation. So I really like the first 2, but I haven't seen the 3. Rob, have you had a chance to check out this Percy Jackson series yet?
I watched the first 2 episodes. I haven't seen the third one. I liked it. You know, I mean, we talked about it on the show, and I watched it because of that, and I really liked the show. I thought it was really, really good.
I myself right now am an episode behind on Jack Reacher. I'm an episode behind on Monarch, I think, and I'm an episode behind on Percy Jackson. So I got to get caught up on those. All right, next up. Connor Russell writes, did you know that the director Christopher Landon has left Scream 7? Yeah, we talked about that a couple of weeks ago, I think. So, again, you know, some people ask me, like, why don't you think this stuff going on with Scream 7 is a bigger story? Look, guys, I hate to say it, but nobody cares about Scream. I know that might sound weird, but hold on a second. Let me pull this up. Do you know how much Scream 6 made at the box office? Scream
I do 6 not
made $168 million. Now, you can say, and I talked about this on Open Mic a few weeks ago. You can say, well, you know, $168 million on a pretty low budget is still pretty good. And it is. Don't misinterpret me. I'm not saying it's not. But whether it was made for $1 or whether it was made for $500 million, $168 million total box office means almost nobody went to go see it. Right? Like Godzilla Minus One hasn't made $100 million yet, but it's a success because they made it for like what, 15 million? So it's successful, but it's also fair to say next to nobody has seen it because it hasn't even made $100 million at the box office. And I love Godzilla Minus One. So Scream 6 was successful because it made more money than it cost to make. Yes, it was successful, but nobody's seen it. Like, Scream is not a relevant franchise. And I say this as somebody who's enjoyed a couple of the last few Scream movies, but it's just not a relevant franchise. And so I think if Scream, Rob, was like a $500 million franchise, $400 million, $700 million, I would think a lot of the drama that's gone on with the Scream franchise would be bigger or higher on my list of the big stories of 2023. But it's literally a story of casting shuffles and losing a director on a franchise that isn't relevant, that not a ton of people go to watch. And I'm sorry to say that, but guys, this isn't an opinion. That's a hard number, $168 million. Not many people go to watch these movies. That's just the reality. That's not saying that the movies are bad. That's not saying that the movies aren't successful compared to how much they cost to make. Not at all. But the reality is, I mean, less people went to go see this than went to go see the Marvels. And nobody went to go see the Marvels. So I don't know, Rob, what do you think about that?
Well, I look, I think this Scream franchise as a horror franchise makes the kind of money that makes making them, it's a good business choice.
Absolutely.
They're not expensive to make.
100%.
And a lot of people like those films. I mean, look, do we need a Scream 7 in the world? I don't think so. Maybe some people want to see that. I would much rather see more original horror like Talk to Me or Smile or any number of horror films that have come out that are better. I understand it's a known IP. I mean, look, Saw X came out this year, and I quite enjoyed it. I was like, that's pretty good. But these films, to me, it's the same thing over and over again. And I honestly, I don't care that much. Because I really love the first one. The first Scream is both a parody of the slasher genre and itself a great slasher movie. And it works on so many levels. But ever since that first movie came out, nothing has ever hit the heights, I think, of that first film because it was so fresh and new. And, I remember being kind of knocked out by it. And I had so much fun with it. It's like, okay, the jokes kind of worn a little thin, but if people like them,
or very, but here's the other thing I try to point out to people. It's like, John, like, oh my gosh, the next Scream is going to be without its lead. Who cares? Nobody cares. Because in case you missed the memo, the last Scream movie was made without the star of the franchise.
Right.
Right? Sydney, who is the star of the franchise, wasn't there. And guess what? They were still able to make a Scream movie. And it was kind of successful compared to its budget. And people still went to go, like what few people go to see it, still went to go see it. So this idea of like, oh, now they lost another actor. They're constantly switching actors. And they just lost the franchise star. And it still did okay. So anyway, that's just kind of my thoughts on that. All right, we need to keep moving on here. I dragged that out too long. All right. Devin Littis writes, Happy New Year, good Canadian kid. Thank you so much, Devin, and a Happy New Year to you and everybody else as well. All right. Next up, we got Damaris Love, who writes, get some sleep. Yeah, I definitely plan on getting some sleep today when the show is over. Irene Jobson writes, cheers to 2024 and all my peeps. And by the way, just a side note, we're a movie show. We talk about movie issues, but to all of our fellow film-loving brothers and sisters in Japan, what a way to start the new year with a 7.5 earthquake. All of our thoughts and well wishes go out to you guys. So, here's hoping, hey, it can only go up from here. So all of our thoughts to all of our film-loving brothers and sisters out there in Japan. All right. Sam Fisher writes, I recently rewatched Fantastic Mr. Fox because I saw the argument that it was a Thanksgiving movie, but it is, by the way, but I forgot how cussing amazing this movie is. It's a really underappreciated little movie, Rob, because a lot of times when conversation about animated movies come up, very rarely does this one get brought up, but it's a wonderful little film. What did you think about it?
Oh, dude, I loved it. I thought it was great. Beautifully made. And, I think it's true. I own it. I think it's a terrific film. All
right. Next up, we go on to Mega Red, who writes, Happy New Year, John Campea Show crew. Had the day off, so I got high and finally caught the show live. Best way to ring in the new year. Looking forward to more great movie experiences with you guys. Well, thank you so much for that, man. It's good to have you. It's always great when somebody who doesn't often get to watch a show live can jump in and be a participant as well. So it's good to have you here, man. You may have a great year ahead of you, Mega Red. All right. Stephen 19 writes, enter the year of the Highlander 2, and according to Jason X, hockey will be outlawed in 2024. Yep. 2024 is going to suck balls. Hopefully a Canadian team will bring back the cup to Canada. You know what? I got to fulfill something I've wanted to do for the last 20 years. I finally got to go see a hockey game at the Scotiabank Arena in Toronto.
You did.
And it was a wonderful experience, although the Leafs lost. Actually, they played 3 games while I was in Canada. They lost all 3. But that being said, Rob, get this. I keep trying to tell people this and they don't believe me. Like Ann wouldn't believe me when I'd say, if you think it's hard getting Laker tickets and it's expensive to get Laker tickets, it's worse in Toronto to try to get Toronto Maple Leaf tickets because hockey isn't a fandom thing there. It's a religion. It's a religion. People who aren't Canadian won't understand. But when Ann and I decided to get tickets, right? We jumped on the ticket, the secondhand, because you can't buy them firsthand because everything's sold out. We jumped on the secondhand ticket purchasing site. Now, for a Laker game, you can get a nosebleed seat for like $50. If you want to go right up to the top of the rafters, you can get a nosebleed seat for about $50. When we were looking at the chart, there was a seat. Follow me here, guys. At the very back right-hand corner, up against the roof. So it's up here, and then you had like a private box wall here. So right on the ticketing page, it said, this seat has an obstructed view. So you weren't going to see about 30% of the ice because there was going to be a wall literally blocking a bunch of your view. Very top, nosebleed, in a corner, a wall blocking 30% of your view. That ticket, $335. It's people who aren't Canadian just don't get it. They just don't get it. Anyway, we move on. Thanks for that, Stefan. TJ Perry writes, I was so surprised by What If Season 2. Not perfect by any stretch, but a buttload of fun. Kahori is awesome, even though she basically has unlimited powers. I have only, Rob, watched the first episode of What If Season 2. Wasn't great. It was the Nebula one. What if Nebula joined the Nova Corps?
Oh.
And it was all right. But I mean, I don't think, honestly, a couple of episodes of What If have been great. But I think overall, it's a very forgettable, not important to watch show. So I've seen the first. Have you watched this season of What If?
I haven't watched any of it, but I do want to watch it because I've heard it's good. So people said by the end it gets really interesting. So I do want to watch it. I will say this: they showed the Hot Toys is making an Iron Man, a Sakaran Iron Man armor.
Ooh.
But I hated it. I hated the way it looked. I'm like, I don't want to buy this. Which is surprising for me to say about a Hot Toy figure, but there we are. I just didn't like the design at all.
So that's unfortunate.
Somebody's going to like it, but I'm not that person.
Okay, next up, we got Emma Murdoch writes, I just wanted to say thank you. I truly fell back in love with films that I wouldn't have given a chance to. Taking family to share that joy in theaters, all because of this show. Aw. Thanks from Mississauga. And I was just in Mississauga. That is awesome. And I love hearing stuff like that because movies are experiential events. You hear me say that all the time. And experiences, while great on their own, are always better when shared. Much like sex. Solo's fine, but it's better when you got other people involved. The movie-going experience is wonderful. Even if you're going alone and sitting down watching a movie, great experiences. But when you get to do it with people, you do it with people who are close to you, you get to have those shared experiences together. It's always great. By the way, Irene Jobson is asking in the live chat, where is Mississauga? It's in between Hamilton and Toronto. So you got Hamilton, Burlington, Oakville, Mississauga, Toronto. And it's about an hour from Hamilton to Toronto. So that's where all that is. All right. Next up, we've got... where are we? We're at Luke1234 who writes, did you see Linus Tech Tips review of a 115-inch TV? Sweet baby Jesus, this thing is insane. I did see it. Oh my God, I did see it.
I know.
You saw that? Did you see that video?
Yeah.
Ooh.
I want one.
Yeah, now look, I currently have, Ann and I just recently got an 85-inch to hang in our living room, and I love it. And we've got a 150-inch short throw laser projector in the theater room. But man, that TV,
I know,
looks sick.
John, did you see that video has only been up for a day, but it has almost 1.5 million views?
No, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Linus is a very popular, successful YouTuber. Good Canadian kid, by the way. Yeah, that is a TV that I would love to get my hands on.
Come on.
Woo. All right. Next up, we got Diggy Slick, who writes, opinions on Fargo, show and movie. I personally think season 1 and 2 are some of the best TV I've ever seen. I loved how the show is a bit connected to the movie. Billy Bob reminds me of why he's masterclass. I love Fargo the movie. Love Fargo the movie. I've never seen a single episode of the TV show, and I've always heard it's great. Rob, have you watched Fargo at all?
I've watched it all except this season, except the Juno Temple season. It's really excellent. It's really excellent TV, and I cannot. If you want a show that is bingeable, and every season's different, so you're gonna love it. You and Anna love it. It's a great show.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. I heard John Hamm's in this season too.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, but I haven't seen it. By the way, I wanted to ask you, did you see the voiceover artist who voiced the Coyote in Coyote versus Acme, another movie that Warner Brothers shelved, tweeted a picture out yesterday of a still from the film of the Coyote sitting in court next to his lawyer?
I think I've seen that image before. I want to see
think
that's new.
I hadn't seen the image, but he says that see it in 2024. So I don't know if he knows. I mean, it just struck me because I really want to see this movie.
Yeah, I'm curious to see too. But what I've just had too many times movies that are in development or may happen or whatever, where some lower on the totem pole person says, oh, it's going to happen. And everybody goes, oh, it's happening. And then it never does. So while I think that's a cool tweet, I decided not to make a topic today because until John Cena says,
right,
hey, it deals, because you know what? The guy who does the voice of the animated, that's the last person who's actually going to know.
Sure.
So
sure.
I am choosing not to let myself get too excited about that yet. And we'll see if some legitimate news comes out about it.
I mean, because I read that article. I remember when the article came out like 30 years ago, the essay that it's based on. And I really want to see this movie. I just don't understand, because with the good scores it was getting, I just don't understand why this movie was shelved. That was another thing I wanted to talk about in terms of news stories in 2023, was that Warner Brothers shelving finished movies that are good, like this one.
But here, we did this story, I think last week, a couple of weeks ago, because one of the producers was talking that no other studio is bitten on it. Like, right. So, I mean, and nobody likes it when I say it, but it's like that kind of proved Warner Brothers' point. No studio thinks this movie's actually can make money. And I hear it's good. Phil Lord says it's good. I'm interested in seeing it. But it seemed that Warner Brothers, and apparently none of the other studios, believe this movie could actually make money if it's given a theatrical release.
That's true.
And so then there's the streaming option, but you're not going to make any money off it putting it up on streaming. So it becomes, again, once Phil Lord came out, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, that's of Lord and Miller. Once Phil Lord came out, because he'd seen it and said, this thing's really good. It's like, so the guy who made Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is saying this is really good. That's good enough for me. I'd love to see it, but it's not my money, right? I'm not the one who has to put up, whatever, 25, 50, 70 million dollars to get this thing out into theaters, mount a marketing campaign. And I'm not the one who has to do that, but I would love to see it. So hopefully sometime in 2024, we'll get a chance to put our eyes on it. All right. Let's keep going here. Next up, we've got Jay Loco writes, before New Year's, I watched Saltburn. Talk about starting the new year with a bang. It squeezed into my top 15 before the year ended. So revolting yet intriguing. Rob, I don't know if you had oh, no, you did see Saltburn.
I did see both Saltburn, yeah.
Here was my reaction to it. Even though it is a very different movie than the one I'm about to mention, I walked away from it feeling eerily the same. And that's Robert Pattinson's and Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse. You see what I'm talking about?
I can see that.
They're very different movies, but I mean, I remember I walked away from Saltburn going, what's that? Oh, I remember the last time I felt like this was when I walked out of watching The Lighthouse. I don't know what the fuck I just saw. Like, there's brilliance in there, but I don't know. What did you think about Saltburn?
I liked it. To be honest, I didn't really know. It kind of went in a direction I wasn't expecting. I didn't know much about it other than the trailer, but I was sort of off my radar, but I thoroughly had a good time watching it. I'll tell you that.
It's just one of those films that I think people are going to be talking about for a while. All right.
I do too.
Let's move on here. Next up, we got Cortez Johnson, who says, have you seen Kung Fu Panda 4 trailer, John? Yes. And I really enjoyed it. Rob, you remember that at CinemaCon all the way back in April, that's where they announced Kung Fu Panda 4. And Jack Black came out on stage and said, okay, we don't have a trailer to show you, but I'm going to act out what the trailer is. And he acted out an entire trailer, narrated and acted out an entire trailer on stage. It was mesmerizing. Now, I admit I wasn't a big fan of Kung Fu Panda 3, but I really like Kung Fu Pandas 1 and 2. Like
they're
lot.
Good.
So I'm excited. Where's your anticipation level like for this one?
I mean, again, it's not something I'm going to run out to go see, but I like this franchise. It's fun to watch. So unlike you, I thought the first 2 movies were really, really good. But I liked part 3. I didn't dislike it. So I'll watch this.
I didn't hate it.
Yeah.
All right.
But
let's see. Let's move on here. Next up, we got Sanchez guy who writes, hey, John, since you mentioned Disney and Warner Brothers 100th anniversaries, I also read that my favorite toy company had also celebrated its 100th year. Oh, toy company Hasbro had also had its 100th year. I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
You'd think I would know it because my wife was an uppity up over at Hasbro for for like 7 years she was there. But I didn't realize this was they're having a hard time right now. Hasbro's having a hard time right now. I think they bought like Entertainment One or E1, whatever it was called. Didn't they buy it for like $3 or $4 billion? And then they ended
something like that.
Selling it for like 40 million or something along those lines. Yeah, they ate it on that one. Sam Fisher writes, can you work on a project that's not in the public domain, but will be public domain by the time the project comes out? That's a very good question. So let's say, for argument's sake, I think Superman goes into the public domain in 2034. So about 10 years. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's when it comes out. When it goes in the public domain. So could you theoretically, right now, work on a project that features the non-flying Superman character from Action Comics #1? And as long as you don't release it until that time. You know what? I'm going to guess that you can't, because that is still copywritten material. And I don't think you can be using copywritten material, even if it's not released yet. I'm just guessing there, Rob. What would you guess with that?
I would say probably true. I think that's probably correct. I mean, it'd be interesting. I don't know enough about that to say one way or another, but it would seem like what you said is probably the way to go. What's really interesting, John, is a lot of our franchises, they've had a lot of problems after there's a 35-year rule about a movie franchise, like the Predator franchise and Prey. After 35 years, the project, the property reverts back to its original writer. So when they made Prey, they made a deal. They couldn't release it theatrically because it was right on the bubble. So they were able to get Prey made. And if they wanted to do another one, they'd have to go back and renegotiate with the original writer. There's a lawyer in Hollywood who specializes in that. Fox was trying to make a Die Hard 24 crossover with Jack Bauer and John McClane, but they couldn't make the money work because that lawyer wanted way too much cash. So it's always I always find this an interesting conundrum with when it reverts back, or the same thing happened with the Friday the 13th franchise. The original writer got the rights to do something, but it doesn't have Jason in it, because the copyrightable Jason with the hockey mask doesn't show up until Friday the 13th part 3. So who owns the franchise? And they had a long, protracted legal battle, and the original writer got his script back for the first one. So they're going to make a Mrs. Voorhees series or something. It's very interesting.
All right, let's move on here. Next up, we've got, that's the wrong screen altogether. The next one we got is Clayton Yukin, who writes, Return to Oz was a Disney film that used the ruby slippers. How were they able to get around that since the ruby slippers were part of the MGM film? I don't know enough about that movie to know, number one, did Disney distribute it, but did somebody else make it? Number two, was it seen more as a parody? Because stylistically, it's very, very different. So was it used as a parody? Number three, were individual licenses arranged and agreed upon? I just don't know enough about the background, because that movie was in the 80s, wasn't it, Rob?
Yeah.
Like, do you remember that one? What would off the top of your head be the answer to that be?
The Wheelers, they had the Wheelers I remember thinking the Wheelers were pretty scary. I would imagine that they maybe made a licensing deal to use them. I would think that would be the only way they could have got around it. But it was the Ruby Slippers, I don't know, but it was I liked it. It was a much more faithful take to the novels. Maybe that's how they got around it, is that it was more, I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. You know what? I'm going to look that up on the internet and see if there's an answer.
It's a very, very good question. All right. Raymond Verrata writes, according to Deadline, John Williams is putting his retirement on hold. If an interesting project came along, he'd do it. Yeah. I mean, I got to imagine that even if you did retire, like if you're retired, but something like a one-shot thing comes along that looks really exciting to you and whatever, I could see you doing it. Like, yeah, why not? I mean, Tom Brady retired, but then he looked like he had a really exciting opportunity in Tampa and came back, I guess. But yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't know if we'll actually ever hear John Williams work again, but if he did, I'd certainly be excited about it. All right. Emmanuel Rodriguez writes, he is right. Blue Eye is fantastic. I just wish he didn't do anything and everything else finishing the books. Again, I get it. Now, I am not somebody who reads those books. I've never read Fire and Ice books. I just know the show, and that's it. But I can really imagine if I was somebody who was an avid reader of the books and a fan of the books, and I've been told now for years by George R.R. Martin, yep, working on it. Yep, working on it. Yep, anytime now. Only to find out what time he is working, he's working on other things. I could see being frustrated about that.
Well, especially if you're a reader. I mean, you've read the books, you've invested so much time. I mean, those are chunky books, man. I mean, people who are, I know what that's like. There's an author who's written a science fiction series that I've wanted to see the 5th, 6th, and 7th books for 25 years. The first 4 are great. He probably will never write them.
Yeah. All right. Next up, we only got a couple left here. Saf writes, the damage done by the poor superhero movies recently will hurt Deadpool. I predict it will do 800 million max. I agree and disagree with you, Saf. I agree that, look, every time you go to when an average moviegoer goes to a comic book movie and they have an awesome time, they are more likely to go back for an upcoming superhero movie because they just had a great time at one. When you have an okay time or a forgettable time or, heaven forbid, a bad time at a comic book movie, that average moviegoer will be a little bit less inclined to go to the next one, right? So I agree that I think to be charitable, the mediocre comic book offerings we've been getting is going to have an impact on Deadpool 3. I agree. Where I disagree is that whereas you believe instead of making $1 billion, it'll make 800 million, I believe instead of making 1.3 billion, it'll still hit $1 billion. So I do believe there will be an impact, but Rob, I still believe that Deadpool 3 is going to be $1 billion film. What do you think?
100%. I think it's 100% going to be $1 billion film. Also, over the holiday, I heard some stuff I'm not going to say about the movie that made me be like, man, I want to see this movie. I think it's going to be great. And you know what? I mean, you've got Sean Levy, you've got Ryan Reynolds, you've got Hugh Jackman. I can't imagine how they are not having a ball. And I think that it's got to be so much fun to make that movie. I can't believe that it's not going to translate to the screen. Yes, is it a gimmick? the whole movie? Sure. But I think that with these guys are going to make this movie a hoot. And I think it's, of all the movies that maybe I'm setting myself up for disappointment, but I think it's going to be one hell of a fun time at the movies. And I think it's going to make $1 billion. And I think that we're going to go back again and again and again.
By the way, one of our viewers, Angel, is writing, the first 2 Deadpools didn't make $1 billion. Why should this one? We've talked about this several times. The first 2 Deadpool films, first of all, before like Joker and Oppenheimer, were the 2 highest grossing R-rated films of all time. Both made well north of $700 million. I think the franchise combined they made about $1.5 billion. So why will the next one make a bit more than that? Well, there's 3 big factors. Number 1, there's been the wait. We have been waiting and waiting and waiting for this Deadpool. Number 2, actually there are 4 things. Number 2, Ryan Reynolds' star has only grown.
Yeah.
He may be the most influential movie star there is right now. Maybe that's up for debate, but still. Number 3, Deadpool is now in the MCU. And that is something that a lot of people have been waiting for a very, very, very long time. Number 4, and I think this is the biggest one, Hugh Jackman. People have been... Listen, the biggest thing on social media for a long time was the faux feud between Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds. And now you've got Hugh Jackman coming out of retirement from playing Wolverine. Coming out of retirement to come in, and we're going to get... Like, even if it wasn't Deadpool, even, Rob, if it was just Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman in a movie together, a lot of people are going to go see that. But it's Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool and Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. So without any of those 4 big factors, Deadpool 1 and 2 both made well north of $700 million each. You add in those 4 factors, I believe that is more than enough to push over the edge. Rob, obviously that goes all out the window if the movie sucks.
Yeah.
If the movie stinks, that kills it. I'm assuming it's going to be great, but we'll find out. But I think those 4 things pushes it over the edge. How close do you think it's going to get?
I think it's going to go over. Look, I think the movie is going to have a lot, let's just say a lot in it. And it's going to be the kind of thing that people are going to want to go see. I think it's going to deliver the promise of what it's going to deliver, I think, and I think it's going to deliver on its promise, is going to mean that people are just going to love seeing it. I mean, people want to have a good time.
Yeah.
The idea of this movie puts a smile on your face, and I think for the things I heard about it just made me want to go see it more. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. I mean, it's just like, really? I'll go see that. And I think that, I want to see it. I think it's going to be, but like you said, John, it has to be good. But I don't think these guys, look at what they're doing. Even stuff like the Adam Project, Free Guy. I love Free Guy so much. I love that movie. I know. I mean, I think this creative team, the 3 of them together, I can only imagine that they're going to deliver something that's just a hoot
with the
to watch.
writers of Deadpool 1 and 2. So
yeah, right. Exactly.
I think we're in for a ride. All right. Last question of the day comes to us from Al, who writes, get ready for the creators of Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey to make a Mickey Mouse horror movie. I would be shocked if it didn't happen. Like, right. I believe today, Rob, the first day of Steamboat Willie Mickey Mouse being in the public domain, I believe today there are 20 or 30 projects being worked on right now. I really, now, whether any major studio picks them up to do anything with, or is it going to be another low budget schlocky thing like Blood and Honey? That's more likely. But I guarantee you across this city, there's 20 or 30 coffee shops where wannabe writers are sitting down with their little MacBook Airs and hammering out a script of a Mickey Mouse Steamboat Willie horror film of some kind. I have no doubt.
100%.
That's what we should be doing for 2024. We should make that movie.
The John Campea Show presents
Filthy Willie. It's going to be half horror, half porno. Love it. It's going to make
Filthy Willie.
It's going to make $50 million, all
somebody's now working on the Filthy Willie Steamboat artwork for you. I'm sure you'll get it in your inbox tonight.
100%. No doubt. I'll be disappointed if I don't. And guys, with that, that'll do it for today's installment of the John Campea Show podcast. The first installment, kind of a more casual one. We'll be back in the studio tomorrow of 2024. Thank you guys so much for spending time. I honestly didn't think any of you guys would be awake today. I thought we'd be live streaming to nobody today, to be honest with you, but you guys are here. Thank you so much for being there. Big thanks, of course, to Robert Meyer Burnett. Robert, where can people find you online?
You can find me on my own YouTube channel, The Burnett Work. Find me on Instagram at rmburnett, and find me. Those are the best places to find me.
And of course, guys, you can follow me on Instagram, on Threads. You can follow me simply at John Campea. That'll do it for us for now, guys. Thanks a lot for being here. My name's John Campea. And until next time, my friends, bye-bye.